You've probably felt it before. That confusing, almost unexplainable connection where someone isn't constantly chasing you, isn't flooding your phone, isn't trying to hold your attention every second, and yet somehow they feel closer than people who gave you everything on the surface. And it messes with your mind because everything you've been taught about love tells you that attention equals care, consistency equals interest, and distance equals detachment. But this feels different. This feels like someone who disappears yet never really leaves. Someone who goes quiet yet somehow stays present inside you. And the hardest part is you don't know if it's real or if you're just holding on to something that was never truly there. Because when you're dealing with someone like this, you start questioning your own worth. You wonder if you're just an option, just a source of comfort when they need it, just another person filling a temporary space in their life. You tell yourself that if it was real, it would be obvious. If it was love, it would be loud. If it was meaningful, it wouldn't feel this uncertain. But what if the truth is more complicated than that? What if the way they love doesn't follow the rules you've been taught to expect? There's a kind of person who doesn't connect through constant attention. They don't measure closeness by how often they text you, how quickly they respond, or how visibly they show up. In fact, the more something matters to them, the more careful they become with it. The more real it feels, the more they slow down, step back, and try to understand it before they risk fully stepping into it. And that can look like distance, it can look like hesitation, it can look like confusion. But underneath all of that, there's something much deeper happening. Because when someone like this connects with you, it's not about filling silence or feeding their ego. It's not about needing constant reassurance or validation. It's about something quieter, something more internal. They're not just looking at how you make them feel in the moment, they're paying attention to who you are beneath everything. Your patterns, your energy, the way you react when things get hard, the way you exist when you're not trying to impress anyone. And when they start to feel something real, it doesn't excite them in a loud, obvious way, it unsettles them. It makes them pause. It makes them question everything they thought they understood about themselves. So if you've been feeling like you're not getting enough attention, like something is missing, like you're being kept at a distance, it doesn't automatically mean you don't matter. Sometimes it means you matter in a way they don't know how to handle yet. Sometimes it means they're not just interested in your attention, they're connected to something deeper, something they can't easily walk away from, even if they try. Most people are used to a certain kind of love, the kind that's visible, predictable, easy to read. You get messages every day, you get reassurance, you get consistency that you can point to and say, this is real. It feels safe because it's clear. There's no guessing, no second guessing, no wondering where you stand. But with someone like this, that clarity doesn't come in the same way, and that's where the confusion begins. Because instead of chasing your attention, they step back. Instead of trying to keep you engaged all the time, they give you space. Instead of constantly reminding you that they're there, they become quiet. And everything in you interprets that as a loss of interest. It feels like they're pulling away, like they're losing feelings, like you're slowly becoming less important to them. But what you don't see is what's happening internally. They're not wired to express connection through constant interaction. For them, attention is easy. Anyone can give attention. Anyone can text all day, say the right things, show up in ways that look convincing on the surface, but that doesn't mean it's real. That doesn't mean it's deep. And they know that. So when they start to feel something that goes beyond surface level attraction, they don't respond by increasing attention, they respond by becoming more aware. They start observing instead of performing. They start processing instead of reacting. They pay attention to how you affect them in ways they can't immediately explain. And instead of rushing into it, they slow everything down. Because for them, this isn't about keeping your attention, it's about understanding whether what they feel is something they can trust. And that's why it feels so different, because you're looking for signs in the form of attention, while they're experiencing connection in a completely internal way. You're measuring closeness by presence, while they're measuring it by impact. How deeply you affect them when you're around, how long your energy stays with them after you're gone, how much they find themselves thinking about you, even when they're not trying to. So when they pull back, it doesn't mean they've disconnected. Sometimes it means the opposite. Sometimes it means they're trying to make sense of something that feels more real than what they're used to, and instead of expressing it outwardly, they hold it inwardly, quietly, carefully, almost protectively. And this is where most people misunderstand them the most. Because the signs they show aren't obvious, they're not loud, they don't come with clear labels or easy explanations. They exist in small moments, subtle shifts, things that are easy to overlook if you're only paying attention to what's missing instead of what's actually there. It's in the way they remember things you didn't think mattered. Not the big, obvious details that anyone could recall, but the small, almost invisible ones. The way you phrased something weeks ago, the mood you were in during a random conversation, the little habits you don't even realize you have. They don't bring it up to impress you. They don't use it to gain attention. They just notice. And they carry it with them. It's in the way they show up when it actually matters. Not constantly, not predictably, but at the moments where your emotional state shifts. When something feels off, when something feels heavy, when you're not at your best. They don't always know what to say, and they might not express it perfectly, but there's a presence there that doesn't feel forced. It feels intentional. And then there's the way they stay connected, even in silence. You might go hours, days, sometimes longer without hearing from them, and it feels like distance. But when they return, it doesn't feel like starting over. It doesn't feel like they've forgotten you or moved on. It feels like they never fully left, like the connection was still there, just not expressed in the way you expected. These are the signs that don't look like attention, but mean something deeper. Because attention is easy to fake. It's easy to give someone your time when it's convenient, when it feels good, when it benefits you in the moment. But this kind of awareness, this kind of quiet consistency beneath the surface, it's not something that comes from a need for validation. It comes from genuine connection. And the difficult part is if you're only looking for loud expressions, you'll miss it. You'll assume there's nothing there. You'll think you're being ignored, overlooked, or slowly replaced. When in reality, they're connected to you in a way that doesn't rely on constant interaction, a way that exists even when nothing is being said. There's also something else happening that you might not even realize. They don't need constant contact to feel close to you. And that's one of the biggest differences between surface level attention and a deeper connection. Because most people rely on communication to maintain a bond. Without it, they feel disconnected. Without regular interaction, the connection starts to fade. But for someone like this, connection doesn't work that way. Once they feel it, it doesn't just disappear because there's space. It doesn't weaken just because there's silence. In some ways, it actually becomes clearer in those moments because they're not distracted by constant interaction. They're not caught up in the noise of trying to maintain something externally. They're just feeling it internally. And that's why they can go quiet without feeling like they're losing you. Because in their mind, they're not. The connection still exists. It's still present. It's still something they carry with them, even when they're not actively engaging with it. And that's something that can be incredibly hard to understand if you're used to love being expressed through presence and attention. Because from your perspective, silence feels like absence. It feels like distance. It feels like something is slowly slipping away. But from their perspective, silence isn't the absence of connection, it's just the absence of expression. And those are two very different things. So when they don't reach out as often as you expect, when they don't maintain constant communication, it doesn't automatically mean you're not important to them. Sometimes it means they don't need that level of interaction to feel connected. Sometimes it means the connection exists in a way that doesn't rely on constant reinforcement. And that doesn't make it easier. It doesn't remove the confusion or the emotional uncertainty that comes with it. But it does change the way you see it, because instead of interpreting everything through the lens of attention, you start to recognize that there are other ways people experience connection, ways that are quieter, less visible, but not necessarily less real. And maybe the most important part of all of this is understanding the effect you have on them, even when they don't say it out loud. Because someone like this doesn't easily feel calm around others, they're used to being guarded, self contained, in control of their emotions. They don't naturally lean into connection, they don't easily let themselves be affected. But when they do feel something real, it changes them in ways they don't fully understand. Your presence starts to have an impact on their internal state. You calm them without trying. You shift something in them without forcing it, and that's not something they experience often. They might not tell you this, they might not even consciously realize it right away, but it shows up in the way they linger a little longer than they plan to, in the way they come back, even when they told themselves they wouldn't, in the way they hold on to the connection, even when they're trying to create distance. Because this isn't about needing your attention to feel good. It's about feeling something deeper when they're connected to you, something that doesn't depend on constant interaction, constant validation, or constant reassurance, something that exists on its own, quietly but powerfully. And that's what makes it so confusing, because it doesn't look like the kind of love you've been taught to expect. It doesn't follow the usual patterns. It doesn't give you the clear, obvious signs that you can easily recognize. But that doesn't mean it's not real. Sometimes the strongest connections are the ones that aren't constantly being proven, the ones that don't rely on attention to exist, the ones that stay even in silence. And if you've been feeling something like this, if you've been questioning whether it means anything, the truth is, you might not just be someone they give attention to, you might be someone they feel on a level they don't know how to express, but also don't know how to let go of. And once you begin to see it this way, something shifts inside you because you stop looking only at what's missing and you start noticing what's actually there. And one of the most overlooked truths is this: they are always observing you, even when it feels like they're distant. Not in a controlling way, not in a possessive way, but in a quiet, almost unnoticeable way that most people would never pick up on. They pay attention to your emotional patterns, the way your tone changes when something is bothering you, the way your energy feels when you're overwhelmed, even if you say nothing about it, the difference between when you're genuinely okay and when you're just pretending to be. And they don't always respond to it immediately, which makes it seem like they're unaware, but that's not what's happening. They're processing it. They're taking it in, trying to understand it, trying to figure out what it means and how it fits into everything they feel. Because for them, reacting too quickly feels risky. It feels like stepping into something they haven't fully made sense of yet. So instead of responding outwardly, they respond inwardly. They think about it later. They replay moments, they analyze interactions in ways you would never expect, and that's why sometimes they bring up things long after they happened, things you barely even remember saying. Not because they're holding on to the past in a negative way, but because that's how their mind works when they're connected to someone. They don't just experience moments, they study them. So while it might feel like they're not paying attention, the truth is they're paying attention in a way that goes far deeper than surface level interaction. And once you realize that, you begin to understand that their silence isn't empty. It's full of things they haven't said yet. And then there's something even more important. They protect the connection in ways that don't always make sense to you. Because when most people care about someone, they express it outwardly. They show it, they say it, they make it visible. But for someone like this, protection doesn't look like expression. It looks like restraint. They hold back instead of rushing forward. They pause instead of reacting impulsively. They create space instead of overwhelming the connection with intensity. And from the outside, that can feel like a lack of effort. It can feel like they're not doing enough, like they're not fighting for the connection the way you expect them to. But what you don't see is that in their mind, they are protecting something that feels fragile, something they don't want to damage by moving too fast or exposing too much too soon, because vulnerability doesn't come easily to them. It's not natural. It feels like risk, like loss of control, like stepping into something that could hurt them in ways they don't know how to recover from. So instead of expressing everything they feel, they contain it, they manage it, they try to keep it stable. And that can look like distance, but it's actually a form of care, a form of protection that comes from not wanting to lose something that feels meaningful. They're not trying to push you away. They're trying to make sure they don't lose themselves in the process of getting close to you. And that balance, that internal struggle between wanting connection and needing control, is something they deal with constantly, even if you never hear about it. This is also why they don't express love in the way you expect, because for them, it's not about saying it, it's about feeling safe enough to experience it. And instead of openly declaring how they feel, they test the emotional environment around them. They pay attention to how you react when things aren't perfect, when there's tension, when there's misunderstanding, when something doesn't go smoothly. They watch to see if you become unstable, if you become demanding, if you try to force closeness instead of allowing it to grow naturally. Because what they're really asking, without ever saying it out loud, is this safe for me? Not safe in a physical sense, but safe emotionally, safe to be themselves without losing control, safe to feel something without being overwhelmed by it, safe to exist in the connection without it turning into something that consumes them. And every time you respond with calm instead of pressure, understanding instead of reaction, stability instead of chaos, something inside them relaxes. Something starts to open, even if it's slow, even if it's almost invisible. But if they feel pushed, if they feel like they're being pulled into something faster than they're ready for, they retreat. Not because they don't care, but because it feels like too much, too soon. And their instinct is always to protect themselves first. So when they seem distant after moments of closeness, it's not always a loss of feeling. Sometimes it's a response to feeling too much at once. And instead of leaning into it, they step back to regain balance. And despite everything, despite the distance, the silence, the confusion, there's a level of loyalty in them that most people don't recognize because they don't easily replace people they've connected with on a deeper level. They might not always be present, they might not always show up in the ways you expect, but once they feel something real, it stays with them. It doesn't just disappear because time has passed or because things became complicated. You remain in their mind, in their emotional space, in the way they think about connection itself. And that's why they come back. Not always in obvious ways, not always with clear explanations, but in subtle re entries that feel intentional rather than impulsive. They don't just reach out because they're bored or lonely, they reach out because something about you stayed with them, something about you didn't fade. And even if they tried to move on, even if they created distance, even if they convinced themselves it wasn't that deep, there's still something unresolved inside them, something that pulls them back, not out of habit, but out of connection. And that's something that doesn't come from attention, that doesn't come from convenience, that comes from something much deeper, something they don't easily let go of. And when you finally step back and look at everything, not just the moments of silence, not just the distance, not just what feels confusing, but the entire pattern, the entire emotional experience, you start to see the truth more clearly. You were never just someone who gave them attention, because attention is temporary. It fades, it shifts, it gets replaced easily. But the way they connected to you, the way they observed you, remembered you, felt your presence even in your absence, that's not something that happens with just anyone. That's not something they give lightly. You were someone who affected them on a level they don't fully understand themselves. Someone who made them pause, reflect, question, and feel in ways that don't come naturally to them. And instead of expressing it in loud, obvious ways, they experienced it quietly, internally, almost silently. And yes, that silence can hurt. That distance can make you question everything. It can make you feel unseen, unsure, even replaceable at times. But the truth is, being felt deeply doesn't always come with clear expression. Sometimes it comes with hesitation, with internal conflict, with moments of closeness followed by distance. Not because the connection isn't real, but because it is. Because for someone who isn't used to emotional depth, feeling something genuine doesn't feel easy. It feels overwhelming. And that's the part most people never see. So if you've been wondering whether you were just attention, whether you were just something temporary, whether it meant anything at all, the answer isn't always found in how loudly they showed it. Sometimes the answer is in how deeply they couldn't let it go. Because you weren't just someone they talked to, you were someone they felt in silence, in distance, in moments they never explained, but never truly left behind. And even after understanding all of this, it can still hurt. Because knowing something is real doesn't automatically make it feel secure. You can see the signs, you can understand their way of loving, but if it leaves you questioning your place, that feeling matters. There's a difference between understanding them and losing yourself trying to fit into them. They may be okay with space and silence, but you might need clarity and presence. And that doesn't make you wrong. It just means your needs are different. Because connection alone isn't enough if it doesn't make you feel safe and valued. And that's where everything shifts. When you stop focusing only on what they feel and start asking what you need. The way you respond to their distance changes everything. If you chase, they pull away. If you stay grounded, things begin to balance, not because you're playing games, but because you're no longer abandoning yourself to keep them. And in that space, they begin to respect you more, not just as someone they feel, but as someone who holds their own, someone who doesn't collapse into their inconsistency. But here's the truth. They might feel deeply and still not show up the way you need. And that's where you have to be honest, not about their feelings, but about your reality. Because you deserve clarity, presence, and consistency, not something you have to constantly decode. So, in the end, it's not just about whether you meant something to them, it's about asking yourself, is this enough for me? Because being deeply felt is powerful, but being clearly chosen is everything, and you deserve both. And when you reach that point where you stop chasing clarity from them and start becoming clarity for yourself, something unexpectedly powerful happens. The emotional grip they once had on you begins to loosen, not because you suddenly stop caring, and not because what you felt disappears, but because your focus shifts. Before, your energy was tied to their actions. Their silence could affect your mood, their distance could create anxiety, their return could bring relief. It felt like they had control over how you felt, even if they never intended to. But now, you start taking that control back. You begin to realize that your emotional stability doesn't have to depend on their consistency, that your sense of worth doesn't have to fluctuate based on how present or absent they are. And once that realization settles in, you start showing up differently. You're still open, you're still capable of feeling deeply, but you're no longer waiting in the same way. You're no longer holding your breath for their next move. You're no longer trying to decode every silence or analyze every small shift in their behavior. And ironically, this is when they start to feel your absence in a way they never did before. Because for the first time, your energy isn't leaning toward them, it's grounded within you. And that creates a space they're not used to, a space where they can't predict you, can't rely on your constant emotional availability, can't assume that you'll always be there in the same way. And that shift, it doesn't go unnoticed. Because when your energy changes, their experience of you changes too. And this is where something deeper starts to surface inside them, something they may have been avoiding for a long time. They begin to feel the difference between having access to you and potentially losing you. Before, the connection existed in a way that felt safe for them. You were there emotionally available, even when they were distant. They didn't have to fully step forward because the connection wasn't at risk of disappearing. But now that certainty is gone, and that creates a new kind of awareness. They start noticing your absence in moments where they once felt your presence. They start thinking about you in a more intentional way, not just as someone who exists in their emotional space, but as someone who might not always be there. And that realization, it can be unsettling for them. Because now the connection isn't just something they feel internally, it's something they could actually lose externally. And for someone who doesn't easily attach, that feeling carries weight. Not always in a dramatic or obvious way, but in quiet moments of reflection, in the way your memory lingers a little longer, in the way they feel a subtle pull toward you, even when they're trying to stay detached. And this is often the point where they begin to show up differently. Not perfectly, not consistently in the way you might expect, but with more intention than before. You might notice small changes, a little more effort, a little more presence, a little more willingness to engage. It's not loud, it's not overwhelming, but it's there. Because now the connection isn't something they can passively experience anymore, it's something they have to actively consider. And this is where their internal conflict becomes more visible, because part of them still wants to maintain control, still wants to keep emotional distance, still wants to move at their own pace. But another part of them, the part that feels connected to you, starts pushing forward. And those two parts don't always align smoothly. So you might see moments of closeness followed by hesitation, effort followed by retreat, openness followed by silence. Not because they're playing games, but because they're navigating something they don't fully understand within themselves. They're trying to reconcile the part of them that values independence with the part of them that feels something real for you. And that process, it's not linear. But here's the part that truly defines everything: what you do next. Because when they start showing up differently, even in small ways, it can trigger something in you. It can make you want to lean back in, to open up fully again, to invest yourself the way you did before. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you don't lose the version of yourself you became in the process. The version of you that found stability within. The version of you that stopped chasing and started choosing. The version of you that understood your own needs instead of ignoring them. Because if you go back to overextending, overgiving, overanalyzing, the dynamic will slowly return to what it was. But if you stay grounded, if you allow the connection to grow without forcing it, while still honoring your own boundaries, something healthier can begin to form. Not perfect, not effortless, but more balanced. Because now it's not just about how deeply they feel, it's about whether both of you can meet each other in a way that actually works. And this is where everything comes full circle. Because the truth was never just about whether they loved your soul instead of your attention, it was about what that actually means for you. Yes, they may have felt something deeper than surface level attraction. Yes, they may have connected with you in a way that wasn't loud, wasn't obvious, but was real in their own internal world. But your life isn't lived in their internal world. It's lived in your reality. And in your reality, love has to be something you can experience, not just something you have to interpret. So the final understanding isn't just about them. It's about you recognizing that being deeply felt is meaningful, but being clearly valued, consistently shown, and emotionally met, that's what creates something lasting. And if they can meet you there, if they can move beyond just feeling and into expressing, showing, choosing, then what you have has the potential to become something truly rare. But if they can't, if they remain in that space of silent connection without real world consistency, then you already have your answer. Not about your worth, but about what this connection is capable of becoming. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't holding on to the depth of what they felt. It's choosing the depth of what you deserve. Because in the end, you were never just attention. You were something real. And now it's up to you to decide what real should feel like in your life.